Physical torture is a relatively straightforward matter of sadism that leaves behind broken bodies and useless information. That was Alfred W. McCoy. This week we are talking about torture methods and maybe a couple of executions. My name is Kevin, and this is History Goon. What's going on, everybody? This week is going to be a little squirmy, I would like to say. Maybe really squirmy, like really squirmy. If I could make a few people uncomfortable with the content of this episode, total success. And I'll be really happy with that, actually. This week, I'm covering some of the more gruesome and terrifying methods of torture and execution from around the world through time. So buckle up. It's going to be fun. And besides, we've been on a run of, uplifting episodes with the tragic bridge deaths and Indian curses and, possible genocide. So let's do something uplifting, like talk about people being tortured and executed. The first one I want to lead off with is from a part of history that we've talked about a little bit on here, a little bit later than that, but it's still the same culture. One of the earliest accounts of this particular method was in 876. King Aelle of Northumbria killed a Viking leader by the name of Ragnar Lothbrok, which he may or may not have been a real person. He may have killed somebody else that was the inspiration for him. It's hard to say. Anyway, what he did here, though, is he threw him into a pit filled with snakes, which for me is literally what nightmares are made out of. When Ragnar's sons found out about their father's death, they set sail for England from Denmark and laid waste to the kingdom of Northumbria. These guys are all accounted for real people, so hard to say. The warband was led by a Viking warrior that I'm sure some people may have probably heard of, Ivar the Boneless. By killing Ivar's father, Aelle had earned himself something special, a little treat for himself. He had earned the Blood Eagle. So how the Blood Eagle works is he would be forced to his knees, tied chest down to a stump or something similar to that, like a log, whatever. So after he's been tied down, they'd cut his shirt off, and then they would cut from his tailbone all the way up to the back of his neck with a knife, just to get through the skin and the muscle, the important stuff. Then from here, each rib would be broken and cut with an axe away from his spine. And this would have left his internal organs in full view. Kidneys, liver, lungs, heart, everything would have been visible at this point. With all of his insides exposed to the outsides, they would often rub salt directly into the wound to make it even more painful, which, if anybody has ever worked in a kitchen and you've cut yourself and then accidentally got salt in it, that sucks. I couldn't imagine having your back laid wide open and then having somebody just come in with the Mortons and dump a whole bunch in there. No. So now that his ribs are all cut and broken, they would have been pulled up from the point where they had been cut so that they're sticking out of the gaping hole in his back. And then, if he'd survived this far, his lungs would then be pulled up from inside and placed over the exposed ribs to look like the wings of a blood-soaked eagle. A lot of people survived this that had it done. It's hard to say because they don't really have historical records of how many times this was done, but there's a lot of accounts where it was done where people survived for a while after this, minutes up to an hour, quite a ways to have your internal organs pulled out and your chest cavity laid wide open for the elements. Here's another one from the Vikings. It's called hung meat. They would pierce the victim's ankles, most likely between the Achilles tendon and the rest of the leg. If you have ever deer hunted, picture kind of like when you hang up a deer, because you're supposed to hang them head down to process them and feel and skin them on all that stuff. There's a section of their leg where you have the tendon and the bone, and there's like a long strip of just skin in between there, where you would take a knife and slice in there and put it on a rod or whatever, and you hang it up. We've got kind of a similar thing in our own legs. It's not as big. They would make a cut between your heel and your Achilles tendon and run a rod through there and then through the other leg as well. Hang you upside down, which obviously that results in the blood flowing to your head. And if you're left there for long enough, this could cause a brain hemorrhage. The more likely cause of death would have been suffocation, because hanging upside down for long enough puts a lot of stress and strain on your lungs and your core. Because if you're upside down like that and you're trying to breathe, you're basically trying to pull the entire top half of your body up with just your muscles that would control your lungs. Very similar to how people that are crucified die, because you're trying to pick up your entire lower body with just your diaphragm essentially, and eventually it just wears out and that's it for you. And rounding things out with our Norse friends, something called the fatal walk. Vikings were not the only one to do something like this, but it was pretty common for them. The victim would be stood near a tree with their hands bound behind them. Then the person doing the torture would rummage around in their insides and pull their intestines out, which would then be secured to a tree, either a small branch that was broken off, or they would kind of just loop it around something. You're still alive at this point, by the way. Then they would force you to walk around the tree in a circle, and as you're doing that, you're pulling your own intestines out. And if done properly, a human can live for hours with their intestines outside of their body. Which, I mean, if for any of the moms out there, if you've ever had a C-section or anything like that, you obviously know how the process works. I know with my ex-wife, when she had hers with our son, they had her on the table and they have this separator that came down like mid-chest, right? Like just below her, like collarbone, basically, so that she couldn't see what they're doing. I can't see what they're doing. But you can hear it. And we're sitting there, obviously both super nervous. This is our first kid. Just trying to stay calm and everything. And I can hear them working. And I hear the noise. I'm like, that sounds really familiar. It's like, oh, this is what it sounds like when you clean a deer. I'm like, that's my wife. They're taking her insides out. I probably shouldn't be thinking like that. Obviously everything went fine because we had our son. But just kind of a weird thought to be able to hear that and go, oh, that's exactly what's going on. Is they're just like pulling insides out, and that sounds exactly the same, which is pretty gross. So our next category here is we're going to get into the golden age of torture, which would be the medieval times, not the restaurant. This one's pretty rough. It's called the saw. The victim would be hoisted upside down with their hands tied behind them. Then they'd be left upside down for quite a while to kind of let the blood flow to their upper chest and their head. And after a bit of hanging around, rim shot, the executioners would place a 2-person saw between the victim's legs, and they would begin their gruesome work. And when I say a 2-person saw, this isn't a medical grade saw. This is like one of those 2-person old-timey log cutting saws. So you have a handle on either end, and you're just kind of working back and forth. And the teeth on those things are brutal looking. So this is gonna not end real well. So we've now got the saw placed between the victim's legs. Fellas, there's something else there that you probably don't want metal teeth stuck into. Ladies, there's something there that you probably don't want metal teeth stuck into. Yeah. From here, they just start slowly sawing back and forth, cutting the person in half the long way, so that when the sawing was happening, the victim stayed conscious for as long as possible. Most of the victims of the saw didn't die until the blade reached mid-torso. So, there's a lot of important things between your crotch and mid-torso that they've just ripped through with a dirty old saw. I think as soon as it made contact with anything, be like, listen, I will tell you whatever you want. I don't care. Let's reconsider this, because I'd rather not have my my wiener cut in half. This method had actually been used from like the times of ancient Persia up until the last recorded one that I could find was August of 1791, during the slave revolt of Haiti, when a white landowner who was a craftsman by trade was captured by his slaves, and they decided that he should die in a way that he lived. So they grab hold of him and they tie him down and they sawed him in half at the waist, which is not the right way to do it. I can only imagine that if you could have lived for, long enough for it to get to mid-torso, that if you're getting cut in half at the waist, like if they go below your belly where there's no internal organs really, yeah, you're going to die of like massive blood loss, but that's going to suck so bad. Oh, yuck. Let's get into some with some more fun names. This one's got one of the more interesting ones. This is called the Scavenger's Daughter. This one can be traced back to the reign of King Henry VIII of England. This bad boy was invented by the Lieutenant of the Tower of London, who was a man named Leonard Skeffington. The Scavenger's Daughter was fairly easy to assemble. It's basically 3 iron planks that, when put together, made the shape of an uppercase A, and there'd be a set of straps on both of the long ends of the frame. So the victim would be strapped to the top of the frame, like around their, like at about the waist. The hands and feet would then be tied to the long sides about midway down, as far down as they could make your limbs stretch. The body would then be compressed from both sides, pushing the knees into a sitting position and their head in the opposite direction. This would pretty much crush your entire body, causing internal organs, arteries, and veins to rupture, which would cause blood to spray from the ears, nose, mouth, and potentially eyes. Pretty much anywhere you've got a hole, we're going to shoot blood out of it. Basically just squeeze you to death. Here's another pretty cool one. Flaying was pretty common among many a culture. Let's walk through what this would be like. First off, most cultures would tenderize you before taking blades to you. The first way someone would tenderize victims would be to tie them up naked outside for a long period of time, leaving them to get a really nasty sunburn, which would soften the skin and would suck a ton of ass, considering sunburns are a tool of the devil. Especially if you are a pasty person like I am, of mixed and also filthy Northern and Western European blood. The second method would be, I think, the worst of the two options. The victim would be dipped into a large pot or cauldron of boiling water to quote-unquote loosen the skin. So if you were lucky enough to get the boiling water treatment, it could possibly cause blindness, nerve damage, and scorched lungs if you happened to inhale any of it. And all of that is done before they've even laid a blade on your skin. The first cut would usually be made to the face, and then, you guessed it, your face skin would just be kind of peeled off. Oh, God. The torturer would then often score the skin in specific places to make it easier for the skin to be removed in one piece, or at least as few pieces as possible. And he did all this while he was wearing your face. I made one of those two things up. These scoring cuts wouldn't be super deep, but deep enough to cut through all the layers of skin, but not into the muscle, which would result in an unimaginable amount of pain. Think of like the worst paper cut you've ever had, except somebody is then going to stick their fingers in it and try to rip your skin off. You may be asking yourself, how bad would this hurt? You would feel every nerve ending in your body being torn apart and dying. This isn't like falling off your bike and skinning your knee. Your skin is being slowly peeled off of your body. Oh, and some cultures would go so far as to cover your exposed muscle tissue with salt after peeling your skin off. To preserve you, of course. Most of the victims stayed conscious for almost the entire endeavor, and many would survive for days following it. Again, salt. I mean, I think if I was going to skin somebody and then do that afterwards, I would probably smoke the meat to preserve it differently and get a little bit more flavor to it. But Strapato, anybody? This one was pretty simple compared to more elaborate methods on this list. Like most of the other tortures from the Middle Ages, used for witches, because obviously witches and heretics and, people that spoke out against royalty. Or all three. You could be all three. You could definitely be all three. Matter of fact, I got a book that at some point in time may or may not be getting an episode. If you're on YouTube or Spotify, you could have potentially seen that. I've got a copy of the Malleus Maleficarum, which is a fantastic book. It translates to The Witch Hammer. And if I remember correctly from what I know of the book, I believe it's basically an instruction manual with how to deal with witches, which is kind of cool. So the victim would be forced to stand up while their hands were bound behind their back at the wrist. A lot of hand binding. The wrists are then tied to a long rope that's looped over a pulley. You can probably see where this is going right now already. The torturer would then pull the rope, lifting the victim up by the arms. This would bend their arms the wrong way at the shoulder, causing the shoulders to come out of the sockets. So even after both shoulders were torn from place, they'd be lifted continuously. So they've already yanked your shoulders out of the sockets, then they let you down, and your arms would like flop back down like all jello-y and stuff. And then they just keep doing it, just because they could. Another method that they would use for this would be to pull the rope until just before the shoulders popped out and then jerk the rope, causing even more pain. So they could do that one a few more times before they just broke your shoulders, basically. Here's another one that's pretty terrible. Encapramento. I mean, I guess saying pretty terrible could probably be used for any of these. But this one means to tie up like a kid goat. So this is just a creative way to strangle somebody to death. A rope would be tied around the victim's ankles. Obviously, their hands are tied behind their back, because what kind of torture method would it be if your hands aren't tied behind your back? They would then take the other end of the rope that's tied to the ankles and run it up behind your hands that are tied to your back, tie a noose, and then throw it around your neck. No big deal. You're just kneeling there, you got your head tipped back and you're kneeling and you're probably a little uncomfortable. That is until they push you forward and you lay face down. And your head wants to lay forward towards the ground and your legs want to do the same in the opposite direction. Eventually you'd get too tired to keep your head back and your legs up, and gravity and weak muscles would take care of the rest, strangle you to death. This is a method going back as far as 13,000 years ago, according to some researchers. It's also something that apparently the Italian mafia, like old country Italian mafia, was pretty fond of in some cases to, just to send a message to specific people. This might be one of the worst ones on my list. This is a method called Scaphism. Scaphism, or the boats, was created by the ancient Persians. The Greeks, who are usually the victims of this, described it as having someone tied between two wooden canoes. Their head and legs would be left protruding from the box that they were sealed in. So basically, they would take two wooden boats, have one float, put you in it, cut holes for your legs and your head in both of them to make it fit, and put the other one over it like a lid, and then tie it shut. The torturers would then force feed the victim milk and honey until they, there's only one direction that comes out, and then you're living in it in a box. They would then add honey and milk to sensitive areas of the body to attract insects. And at this point in time, they would take the box and the victim to either a stagnant pond to float or just leave them out in the sun. Whoever is stuck in this box is being force-fed milk and honey multiple times a day as they continue to fill the box with poo, where insects would grow in said poo and then start to feast on the flesh of the man in the box. The person wouldn't be able to die of starvation because they're being force-fed honey and milk, and they were more often than not eaten alive by insects. The victim would usually die of septic shock or basically being eaten from the inside out by bugs. The septic shock would be from having that much manure in there with you and not having anywhere for it to go. And then the bug bites, getting poop in them. What a terrible, terrible way to die. There's somebody on Patreon, I can't remember who it is, that keeps commenting like, people are terrible to each other. And it's like, you know what? Yeah, we really are. And a lot of this was because you said stuff about royalty when you shouldn't have, or you happen to be captured by somebody that doesn't like you, or you're a witch. Oh boy, are the witches going to get it here. So if you're into Wicca, just get ready because it's coming. Pretty self-explanatory. The knee splitter was used primarily during the Spanish Inquisition. Even though it has the name of the knee splitter, it was commonly used on other body parts, including elbows, forearms, and lower legs. The device had 2 wooden blocks, one at the top and one at the bottom. There were metal teeth facing towards each other in the center. After the torturer inserted whichever body part he decided on, they would turn the handle slowly, driving the metal teeth into the flesh, muscle, and bone of the victim. The number of teeth varied anywhere between 3 and 22, depending on who built it. When the teeth would close around the limb, it would shred the flesh and bones, mangling it beyond repair. Because you have to think, they're going in, but they're not necessarily going in straight. And then once they're in there and they've kind of set, this guy's cranking on it, and it's not a smooth, it's not like a smooth method of operation. So as he's cranking it, they're twisting and twitching and turning, and they're causing a lot of pain. There were some other variants on the knee splitter. Some had smaller teeth on the sides of the larger ones to cause even more tissue damage, and others would have the teeth heated before they were closed on the victim. This is not necessarily a method of execution. It's more, we're going to do this before we kill you. But if you did die from this, it was from septic shock, blood loss, or having your head cut off the next day on the gallows. Another fun one, pretty self-explanatory. The incel borer. That'd be way better. We should use that on those assholes. The instep borer was used in medieval Germany. It was used as a form of punishment, used on thieves and other petty criminals. Its design kind of looked like an iron boot with a hinge that would allow the victim's foot to be inserted and then removed when needed. Because obviously you don't get to keep our boot. Get out of here. It's kind of picture this as being like a giant metal ski boot, right? The housing on the top of the boot concealed a thick, grooved, and often dull blade, which was, when the boot is closed over the top of the foot, a small crank was operated on the outside. So your foot's in like this, like level, obviously like a shoe. And this blade would be about mid-foot, lined up with that. And then they just crank this thing on. The crank would be twisted, forcing the blade into the top of the foot. The design of the blade was, it kind of varied. It'd either be really thick or wide. They just want to cause as much pain as possible. And this, again, not necessarily something that would kill you, but it would cause a lot of pain, and you would be talking. More importantly, you would tell them everything they wanted, including stuff that they didn't ask for. This is a fun one. Defenestration is exactly what it sounds like. And that comes from 2 separate incidents that both happened in Prague, one in 1419, the other in 1618. In 1419, 7 town officials in Prague were having a meeting when a group of men burst through the door and yelled a bunch of stuff that I couldn't pronounce. One thing leads to another, and the 7 officials are forced to the wall next to the window. They are then thrown out individually, one at a time, to their deaths from the top of this building. Not a huge deal. It did, however, lead to what would be called the Hussite or Bohemian Wars and the deaths of tens of thousands of people. 1618, two imperial officials were hurled from the high window at Prague Castle, and this one led to the 30 Years' War that led to somewhere between 4.5 and 8 million deaths between civilians and military. But when I was looking into that, one of the names rang a bell, and I was like, oh man, that's the guy that Sabaton song Lion of the North is about. Fantastic song. Go listen to it. Highly recommend it. Here's another one for the witches. And also I forgot, the gays got this one too. The Pear of Anguish. This little bastard was used primarily on women who were accused of lying, blasphemy, and of all things, the high crime of having a miscarriage. Because that's your fault. It was also used on people accused of homosexuality, but the biggest use was on women who were thought to be witches. Again, I told you, witches, I'm coming for you this episode. You guys have had it too good for too long. What with your crystals and astrology and other assorted white girl magic, you guys have had it too good for too long. As its name implies, it's a metal device shaped like a pear. It has a little screw on the end of it. So when the screw is twisted, it basically opens up into four like spoon-shaped metal claws with barbs on the ends of them. When the victim was chosen, I'm assuming at random because that seems to be how a lot of this works, the pear would be inserted into different places for different crimes. For liars and blasphemers, the pear would be inserted into the mouth. For women accused of witchcraft or, again, miscarrying, the pear would be inserted into the vagina. And for men accused of homosexuality, I think we can all kind of guess where this is going. Right up the butt. Once the pear was where it needed to be, the screw handle would be twisted to open the device. This would cause massive damage to the inside of whatever hole it was in, rupturing blood vessels, tearing tissue, potentially breaking and dislocating bones. For example, if it's in your mouth, there's no could, it is would break your teeth and probably dislocate your jaw. And I can only imagine, ladies, if this is up there, right, and they open this, depending on how far up they got it, that could probably, like, separate your pelvis, which sounds fucking horrible. And it's a good thing we got thumbs, or else we'd be really uncivilized, right? The pear was reportedly used from the 1600s up until the early 1800s. So we had, we'd started the U.S. and somebody over across the sea is still using this thing. So here's a fun one. We're going to talk about Mazatello, often short to Mazza,
Must be Italian.
meaning to strike or bludgeon. The earliest use was in 1490, just a couple of years before Christopher Columbus decided to sail to Cuba, when Cristoforo Castanea, the Count of Castile-Leon, made a little bit of a min-oopsie when he tried to maybe allegedly assassinate the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire and Pope Innocent VIII, who's like the Pope. The accounting of this is pretty mundane. Says that he was struck on the head with a large wooden mace and then, quote, pierced in the chest with an iron dagger. He was then quartered, which is a whole other thing. His arms and head were hung from the gate of Castel San Angelo, which it's a place that's going to come up again in a future episode. Quote, another part was hung at the gate of Porta San Paolo, and the rest was hung elsewhere around Italy. This was one that was used almost primarily by the Papal States. So if you were being a silly goose around the Vatican, the Pope's going to be like, smash that man's head, please. It seems like I don't know. Of all the ways to be killed, for something. Yeah, we got to go with this. I sentence you to the head crusher. So it's really not as simple as that account made it sound. First of all, like I said, this is a favored one by the Papal States for some reason. But leading up to hammer time, the victim would be led to a freshly built execution scaffold in the public square in Rome. Obviously, we have a priest walking with them to, take confession and all this and last rites and all that and whatnot. They would walk up the stairs to the platform with the victim. This part is wild. So you'd get up to the top of this platform and you're looking around. One of the first things you're going to see is a coffin, which, I mean, yeah, we'll just bring it up with us. Why not? Then you're going to see a giant stone slab, a number of blunt objects, and a dead-eyed man in a black hood. Some of the different clobbering devices that could be used, couldn't really find any rhyme or reason as to which one was used when. I almost wonder if it just came down to kind of like how I picked my vests for the videos. I wore that one last time. I'll grab the other one. I'll wear the green one this time. Not really feeling green. We'll go dark brown. So some of your choices would be wooden mallets, long-handled maces, wooden clubs, pole axes, and by God, sledgehammers. A lot of the pictures are wood carvings or paintings from the time that I saw. It looked like this was they made it look like a gentle little bonk on the side of the head, even though the descriptions are way different. Basically, the victim would be forced to their knees, and then the executioner would put his foot in the middle of their back, between their shoulders, and just kind of push their entire torso down until their head is laying on this block. While they're laying there, chilling out, having a nap, they have a chance to talk to the priest and all that. The executioner would then pick an implement, and unlike execution with an axe where it's a combination of momentum and hopefully a sharp edge, the executioner would just wind up and swing the chosen club around and pick up as much momentum as possible before just slamming it down into the side of the victim's head. What's kind of sketchy about this one is 9 out of 10 times this didn't kill them outright, and they would have to have their throats cut. And pretty often from here, they'd be quartered out and put on display. The last use of Mazza was in September of 1806. So we really haven't advanced all that much from the Middle Ages, from the Dark Ages, there's that one video out there, those two Russian guys, or Ukrainian guys, whatever they were, with the hammer. I guess that's kind of the same thing, but man, I spent too much time on gore sites when I was younger. This just seems like a dick move. This is called the Swedish drink, and unfortunately, there's no alcohol in it. This was used on German peasants by the Swedish military and mercenary groups during the 30 Years' War, which we talked about a minute ago. During the war, soldiers and mercenaries weren't really paid all that well, or sometimes at all. They were told by their higher-ups that basically, since we can't pay you, you can take your payment in, whatever you can find kicking around town. So, in order to get information on troop movements and goods, and mostly trying to figure out where valuables and stuff like that were, the troops and mercenaries would often torture the locals, as you do. One of these methods was to whip up a concoction that would mix dirt, grass, feces, human and animal, urine, and mud. It would usually be brought to a boil, which I'm sure that smelled great, and then force-fed to whomever they thought was withholding information from them. Now that you've been force-fed this refreshing cocktail of poop and mud, they would beat you, usually focusing on the stomach to try to force them to vomit up this awful drink. So I'm assuming, I'm sure, I'm not even going to assume, I'm sure this probably tasted worse going up than it did going down. And a lot of the times, if the beating didn't work, they would just hold you down and have somebody jump on your stomach until you threw up, which is terrible. Oh, God. Next up, we've got execution by elephant, which is pretty straightforward. This was used in Southeast Asia, mostly like India, Burma, that kind of area, and as far away as into Northeast Africa. So where you would have elephants is where we can do this. So, I mean, I guess, like, if you'd done this a few hundred years later, you probably could have done this in, like, the Alps, too. Another future episode. So now we actually have some written accounts from eyewitnesses on stuff, and this part's fun. One of the accounts from 1560 was from Thailand, which was written by Alexander Hamilton, not that one, who was a merchant captain for the East India Trading Company. One of the good guys. He wrote, quote, "For treason and murder, the elephant is the executioner. The condemned person is made fast to a stake driven into the ground for the purpose, and the elephant is brought to view him and goes twice or thrice around him. And when the elephant's keeper speaks to the monstrous executioner, he twines his trunk round the person and stake, and pulling the stake from the ground with great violence, tosses the man and stake into the air, and in coming down receives him on his teeth, and making him off again, puts one of his forefeet on the carcass and squeezes it flat." So they had to train the elephants how to do this, because, it's not just a natural instinct for an elephant to be like, oh, hey, throw something in the air and catch it on its tusks and then smash it flat with its feet. They've actually done, I can't remember, something on Discovery Channel. They studied the brain frequency of elephants, and they have a very similar reaction, like in their brain chemistry, when they see us as we do when you see puppies, where you're just like, oh, it's so cute. They kind of think the same way about us. So they have to train elephants how to do that. Here's another fun one. Before we get into the more common use of how they did this with elephants, a French traveler, Francois Bernier, sat and watched an execution carried out by the Mughal emperor at the time. The Mughal Empire was, at the time, the land of India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. Pretty sure. So here's his account of this fun time that he's about to see. Quote, "Upon a certain day, when I myself was present, some men were brought out who had been accused of having attempted the life of the vizier. They were ordered, accordingly, to be thrown to the elephants, which had been taught to cut their victims to pieces." How are they going to cut them to the pieces? Glad you asked. "Their hooves were cased with sharp iron instruments, and the extremities of these were like knives. On such occasions, the elephant driver rode upon them. When a man was thrown to them, they would wrap the trunk about him and toss him up, then take him with the teeth and throw him between their forefeet upon the breast," so throwing him chest down on the ground, "and do just as the driver should bid them, and accordingly to the order of the emperor." Again, I can speak English, I can read English, I can't comprehend English. "If the order was to cut him to pieces, the elephant would do so with his irons, and then throw the pieces among the assembled multitude. But if the order was to leave him, he would be left lying before the emperor until the skin should be taken off and stuffed with hay and the flesh given to the dogs." Oh. So some of the ones like that where they're a bit more gruesome, they actually had these giant like cleavers that they had custom made to put on the elephant's tusks so that they could just also, again, catch them on their tusks after they've thrown them in the air. But then they could also maybe just miss, I guess, let them hit the ground and just chop them to bits with these giant fucking blades that they had custom made for elephant tusks, which is insane. The most common use of elephants was to have the victim staked to the ground by the ankle, like kind of shackled, like they were talking about before, so they can't run off. The elephant driver would, depending on how the victim was to die, either make the animal squash his head outright, just super fast, or his chest and kill them almost instantly, or torture the person by having the elephant step on limbs first before killing them. One of the accounts that I read was the man was ordered to die slowly, so they staked him out like with his feet real close together and his hands real close together over his head, and this thing just basically walked kind of next to him. Like, so one foot is next to him. The other one is like stepping on his feet and crushing his feet, like toes first. And then the next step would be like around the knee, and then like the pelvis, and then the ribs. And then it'd go over the head and step on like your shoulders and elbows and wrists and fingers, and then come back in, either step on the head or have the elephant lay chest down on the guy's face to suffocate him. Next one, being blown from a gun. Sounded great until I read the entire title. What a way to die. The earliest use that I could find was in 1509 in the areas of Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. They also used it in Mozambique and Brazil, and even our buddies from earlier, the Mughals, got in on the action. George Carter Stent, an English soldier in India, witnessed it firsthand. Quote, the prisoner is generally tied to a field gun with the upper part of the small of his back resting against the muzzle. When the gun is fired, his head is seen to go straight up in the air, some 40 or 50 feet. The arms fly off right and left, high up in the air, and fall at perhaps 100 yards distance. The legs drop to the ground beneath the muzzle of the gun, and the body is literally blown away altogether, not a vestige being seen. So that whole like head flying off thing reminded me of some stories that I've heard of guys that fought in Iraq and Afghanistan where they dealt with suicide bombers, where they have to go out and clean up after it, and they'd be like, we didn't find anything except his head is just randomly over here somewhere. Always seems to be the head. Everything else just kind of like goes kerflooey, and then the head is just like, no, I'm gonna chill out here and break your brain. The British use this pretty regularly in India for a pretty gross reason. Quote, destruction of the body and scattering of the remains over a wide area had religious symbolism. For Hindus and Muslims, the punishment extended beyond death. That was written by one researcher that had some extensive looking into this. This is because for funerary rites, the entire body has to be intact. So it's a pretty scummy thing to do. But the Imperial British, they were kind of into doing scumbag stuff, you know. Here's the thing when it comes to the process itself, is it wasn't actually a cannonball being loaded in before the guy is tied to the gun. Just, you know, cannonballs are expensive, and if you're in an area where you're fighting, sometimes it's hard to get supplies. So, yeah, I guess, you know, like blank loads really aren't all that bad. It's just gunpowder and wadding. So if we use blanks, it's not a projectile causing the damage. It's the pressure of the explosion happening in the barrel and the body being pressed against the end of the barrel, not letting the pressure escape. I mean, except for directly through the person's spine, effectively blowing them to rags. Other times, if they wanted to really make a point, they'd load it with grape shot and then blast the person with what's essentially giant buckshot. Because if you've never seen grape shot, like, it was pretty gnarly. You know, you think buckshot, like, yeah, buckshot's terrible because it's like the diameter of a 38 or a 380 or whatever it is. Where grape shot is like the size of my son's fist. So, I mean, you got a chunk of lead, like, you know, 3 inches around, that there's a bunch of them in there, and they just kind of chuck it through you. Things didn't always work out according to plan with such executions. At a mass execution in I typed that word and I can't say it. Firozpur in 1857, there was an order that blank cartridges should be used, but some guns were loaded with grape shot instead. Several of the spectators facing the cannons were hit by the grape shot, and some had to have limbs amputated as a result. In addition, some of the soldiers who had not been withdrawn properly sustained injuries from being hit by pieces of bone and chunks of flesh. And another case, a soldier who was to be shot fell down just as the shot went off with the following results. Quote, one wretched fellow slipped from the rope by which he'd been tied to the guns just before the explosion, and his arm was nearly set on fire. While hanging in the agony under the gun, a sergeant applied a pistol to his head, and 3 times the cap snapped. Oh. The man each time winced from the expected shot. At last, a rifle was fired into the back of his head. The blood poured out of his nose and mouth like water from a briskly pumped handle. This was the most horrible sight of all. I have seen death in all forms, but never anything to equal this man's end. I mean, it could have been worse, I guess, because like he could have fallen just as it went off, and it just, blow his entire everything from the shoulders up off, and then just leave a twitching pile of gross there. So now that we've got out of some of the old time stuff, let's get into some more modern, because there's definitely some more interesting modern stuff here. I can't wait to get to the last one, because that one's a lot of fun. So this one may be a little uncomfortable. The Glasgow Smile originated in Glasgow, Scotland in the 1920s or 1930s. It was used mostly by street gangs as a way to send a message to members of rival gangs or people that owed the money or whatever. The victim would be usually jumped in a side alley and held down as the assailants set in to do their grim work. The victim would have their mouth cut from the corners up towards the ears in the shape of a smile, hence the Smile name. The cuts would usually be made with a razor, broken bottle, or utility knife, and after the face was slashed, the victim would be beaten. The reason for the beating is so that when they screamed, this would tear the skin and the muscle apart at the corners of the mouth. I do know someone that lives in Scotland, admin Ben, over on the Facebook page, said that they actually do this with credit cards now too, which sounds fucking terrible. Like, I can imagine, like, yeah, a knife would suck, but dull plastic just being sawed back and forth in your mouth. No, I'm good. People unlucky enough to not survive this obviously died of blood loss, and those lucky enough to survive would be left permanently scarred. Couple of examples of this would be like the Joker from the newer Batman movies, or if you've ever seen Braveheart or Sons of Anarchy, there's an actor in there named Tommy Flanagan that had this happen to him. I think he was a radio DJ at the time, and he got like jumped outside of the studio, if I remember the story right, and they cut his face up pretty good. But they definitely, I mean, he definitely made a career with it, because he played one of my favorite characters on Sons of Anarchy actually was him. That was Chibs, the Scottish guy. One of the more modern ones on the list, the Tucker telephone, was developed in the 1960s on the Tucker State Prison Farm in Arkansas. It was invented by the resident prison doctor named Dr. A.E. Rollins. Yep, that's right. A doctor came up with this, which is fantastic. The prisoner would be brought to a quote-unquote hospital room where they would be secured to an examination table. They'd be hooked up to said device. The device was made up of a small electric generator connected to an old-style crank phone, think like the rotary phone that your grandma had on the wall when when you were a kid. If you're in your late 30s to 40s, 50s, you guys have seen a rotary phone. God, I'm old. The ground wire would be wrapped around the prisoner's big toe, and the hot wire would be applied to the genitals, which would complete the circuit. And if you don't know how electricity works, you complete a circuit and you get zapped. When the phone was dialed, it would create an electric current into the prisoner's body, more specifically into the genitals. The guards or doctors would often... Oh, God, this is terrible. The guards or doctors would often make, quote, long-distance calls where the phone would be cranked until the prisoner passed out. There wasn't enough electricity generated to kill the prisoner, but it would cause sometimes permanent brain damage and organ damage. And this was used up until 1968. So this got a couple years out of it. This one is rough. March of 1985, a group of men in South Africa found a local counselor who'd been accused of corruption. The counselor was pulled from his home, had his hands bound behind him, again, because this is going to be a torture thing. Actually, this isn't even torture. This is straight up, we're going to kill you with this. So he has his hands bound behind his back and a car tire forced down over his head and then around his torso, which sounds like something you would do to somebody in a cartoon, right? Stick a bunch of tires around him and roll him down a hill like an episode of Jackass. Except, unlike an episode of Jackass, the tire is then filled with gasoline and set on fire. This is the first account that I could find anywhere of what is called necklacing. The way you die is obviously horrific, considering rubber tires can burn at temperatures of upwards of 700 degrees. That's hot enough to cause 4th degree burns, which if you don't know what a 4th degree burn is, it's not just burning your skin and muscle, it's burning internal organs and bone as well. So you can't just put like colloidal silver or something on it and be like, I'm good. This death can take in the area of 15 to 20 minutes to occur. I mean, yeah, you're getting a lot of like nasty, like rubber smoke in your face. But oh man, what a way to go. I can almost smell it. Like if you've ever been near like a tire fire, it's a smell that you don't really forget. And talking about it and thinking about it, I'm like, I can like almost taste that smell. That's pretty gross. Necklacing is and was fairly common in countries like South Africa, the Ivory Coast, Somalia, which we're going to visit here soon, South Africa. I already said South Africa, Haiti, and Brazil. So basically, let's call them lower income countries. In Brazil, it's usually carried out by drug dealers who call it micro ondas. I don't speak Portuguese, which is a reference for the microwave. Because having seen some pictures of what victims look like after this, it looks like you threw a steak in the microwave and just cooked it. It's pretty gross. I'm not going to post pictures of it. Just let it be known. If you're a curious boy like me, there are pictures of it out there. And go see it. So, as we get nearer to the end of the list, I want to talk about one of the most brutal, gruesome, graphic combinations that we have on here. Full disclosure, this one's pretty bad. The abdominal slap is when the interrogator backhands the detainee in the stomach. That is often followed up by the much feared attention grasp, which is when the interrogator would grab the detainee by the collar and pull them very close to their face to yell at them. Those are real, and that's considered torture in wherever we use that, like not we, but like the U.S. government uses that one when interviewing people that may or may not be part of clubs. But yes, that is considered a torture method, to give somebody a pink belly and then get in their face and yell at them, like my dad used to do when I didn't run hard enough in baseball. Anyway, next one is kind of a different story from the last. Y'all ever heard of waterboarding? I'm sure you have. The detainee is strapped to a table or a flat board, has a thin cloth draped over their face. The interrogator would then pour water onto the cloth and directly into the detainee's airways. So having water dumped into your nose and mouth, because they generally have it on a slight downward angle, so your head is tipped down a little bit. And having water poured into your mouth and nose like this would make you feel like you're drowning. Obviously, they don't want to kill you. They just want to scare the piss out of you, which is what it's going to do. They'd pour the water incrementally to avoid killing the person, obviously. You can die from it. And this can cause like lung damage, brain damage, oxygen deprivation. If you're struggling against the bonds hard enough, it can cause broken bones. And obviously some like long-lasting psychological damage. Not great. There is a guy on Instagram that I just started following the other day. If I find it, I will post it. His whole shtick is he refers to himself as the CIA's sommelier. So he basically waterboards himself with a contraption that he's built in his backyard with different things. Um, One of the newer ones that I watched that I was like, that would suck so hard, is he waterboarded himself with Minute Maid lemonade. And I couldn't imagine, because like that Minute Maid's got a lot of tang to it, and I couldn't imagine pouring that up my nose voluntarily. Ooh. Um, Another one that I didn't put on the list, but I know of it from watching documentaries about certain things, was a method that Saddam Hussein used to use a lot. There was a couple of them where they would take, like, whatever political prisoner you were for whatever you did, and they'd basically tie you like to a bed and beat the soles of your feet with a metal rod, which that would suck real bad. Um, they'd also tie people to like industrial fans, like the ceiling fans, throw like handcuffs over it, turn it on, and get you spinning until you wanted to talk. And a lot of those rooms also had D-rings on the floor, so that they would throw the handcuffs over the fan blades. These are like big, strong fans, so they can hold a person up. And if you didn't talk, or they didn't like how you were talking, they would shackle your ankles and then run them into that D-ring to hold you in place and turn the fan on. But they had it on like almost like a dimmer switch where they could control the speed, and they could like just very slowly twist you around so that your feet are staying in one place, but your torso's twisting. There was one guy they interviewed that he actually got his spine broken when they were doing this to him for whatever he had done, allegedly. And the other one they used a lot was they would take a glass Coke bottle and jam it up somebody's ass. Because, yeah, that sucks. It's humiliating. But also, just like mathematics, Coca-Cola is universal. So everywhere you go that you see a Coca-Cola sign, you're going to think about that time that one of Saddam Hussein's guys basically kicked a glass Coke bottle up your ass. So, yeah, there's some psychological effects there, I would say. And last, but certainly not least, one that never really came about, but it seems like an interesting concept. This is called the euthanasia coaster. It was designed and worked up by Lithuanian artist Julianas Urbonas. I think I did that right. I'm about 90% sure that I'm wrong, but it felt really good. He was a member of the Royal College of Art in London at the time. Urbonas had some experience with this field, being a former amusement park employee, so it's unknown how many people he's actually killed. His idea was to, quote, take lives with elegance and euphoria. He described it as, quote, the ultimate roller coaster, as one that sends out 24 people and they all come back dead. The design is absolutely wild. It starts with a 1,600-foot vertical rise, which would take like 4 to 5 minutes due to the angle and the height to get all the cars up there. This was to give the riders, quote, time to contemplate their lives. Here's where it gets kind of strange, because this seems more like a voluntary suicide machine, which is a good band name. Nobody take that, just in case I ever like acquire musical skills. Because at the top, everybody's got a button in their cart with them, and everybody has to hit the button to agree to go through with the ride. If you don't hit the button after the timer comes up, there's a ladder that you can just go back down because you've had a change of heart, and that's fine. Probably why they give you so much time on the way up. If you decided to stick to your guns, it would crest and then drop over the other side, reaching speeds of 220 miles an hour, which is pretty close to terminal velocity, before shooting off into the first of 7 loops that would get smaller and tighter as the carts traveled through them. So the reasoning for the loops getting smaller as you go is because it had to maintain the 10 Gs of force that would be absolutely fatal due to cerebral hypoxia, which is just a real fancy way of saying no brain, oxygen, I go sleep night. At the end of the loops, it would take a very gentle right-hand turn and come back to the barn where it would leave from. You could be unloaded. And also, at the barn, there would assumably be more people that wanted to get on for the ride of their lives. So that was some torture and execution methods. And when I say some, there's so many more. There's so many more. Because we just gotta get creative about how we kill each other. Hard to believe that, like, if it weren't for thumbs, we're no different than chimps. But piece of junk DNA got kicked on and like, hey, you guys are going to grow these other things out the side of your paws, and you're going to run the world and be the apex predator. I could do another. I could do a series on this. I could do another 10 episodes on just different torture and execution methods because there's a lot of them. I mean, obviously, you got like the rack and the wheel and all that stuff, but everybody knows about that, you know, or the Iron Maiden, which wasn't actually ever used. It was just a scare tactic. And don't even get me started on lethal injection because, like, how boring. Ugh. Gotta get creative again. Like, you know, I'm not a huge, I guess, not a huge death penalty proponent unless you do certain things. Like if you hurt kids, yeah, I'm okay with you not being around anymore. You hurt animals, I'm also okay with you not being around anymore. I can't remember what state it was. If it was, I want to say it was like Mississippi or Louisiana. It was one of the two. Just passed a thing where if you're convicted of a sex crime with a minor, they have gone past the chemical castration part and moved to physical castration. And I can only hope that they do it with like a 20 gauge or a 410 where they just blow your shit off, like all the way off, so that you can never hurt anybody else with it again. What a shame, right? No, I think that each state should have their own. So like when you go to the Wikipedia page, it's like, state capital, state tree, state bird, state method of execution. I think that'd be kind of cool. Get creative, but again, you have to be able to prove without a shadow of a doubt that whoever did whatever is getting it, because that's important. Because you can't just be executing people willy-nilly. But you know what? Honestly, let's do a thing. I want to know what you think your state's execution method should be. So to do that, get on the Facebook page. Go over to Facebook and hop on History Goon. Just punch in History Goon Podcast. It's the only one that's going to pop up. There's a bunch of us over there. So when this episode comes out, I'll obviously post. And then in there, it's like, hey, this is how I think we should execute people in Alabama or wherever you're from. You know? Means I got to think up one for Vermont, and it can't just be like, oh, I know what it is. We're going to waterboard you with maple syrup. We're going to get you. That shit's sticky. It's not gonna be fun to go. And we're going to make sure it's with like fancy, like the really light stuff, because nobody actually wants that. It's garbage. I want like the last two boils, where it's like real dark, where it almost looks like used motor oil. Perfect maple syrup. The thick, dark stuff. Oh, yeah. That's good shit. That's the good stuff. This fancy grade A nonsense. Give that to the out-of-staters. So, yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know how you would like your state to kill people if they deserved it. That'd be kind of fun. While you're on the internet, because I know you're on the internet, patreon.com/1159media. $5 and up gets you access to a bunch of stuff. Gets you early access to my show. Gets you early access and backdoor access to Guestnicity with Luther. Almost Fiction with Chase. I don't think Chase does backdoor stuff because I think he would have the same thing where I do, where it's like, I know personally for me, it's like, why do you want to sit here and watch me read and not be able to read? I can read. Like I said, I can read English. I can speak English. I just don't comprehend it well. You also get early access and backdoor access to 911 calls with the operator, the Never Daily with Sam and Chase, and all kinds of stuff. Great community. Honestly, the $5 is worth the community alone. Just throwing that out there. If you want to support me directly, I have a Ko-Fi. It's ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. And you can throw me $5. You can throw me $100 if you want to. I'm not going to sit here and jingle my digital coin cup. But if you think what I'm doing is worth giving me a couple bucks, highly appreciate it. That being said, also, if you can hear the sound of my voice and you want to see the sound of my face, if you don't have Spotify, I do have a YouTube channel now. You can go over to YouTube and punch in History Goon Pod. Actually, you know what? Just go. You know how YouTube works, right? I mean, you go to YouTube. Oh my God, I'm retarded. So yeah, if you go over to YouTube and you go to your search bar and you punch in History Goon, man, you're gonna get like so much stuff, and it's all gonna be me. I do have. I've got a few full length episodes up. I've got actually from the Leopold episodes up to current are on YouTube. Because the ones before that I didn't have video for. I didn't do video for. I've also got a bunch of shorts, which at some point I'll probably go back and record a bunch of shorts for the other stuff that I did before I was doing video, just to throw those up there too. Yeah, it's just it's a new thing. It's just another way to get my stuff out there, and I highly appreciate everybody's support. I don't really know how to end this one because we didn't do any Goon stuff. So we're all going to die someday. Just hopefully not by being executed or tortured to death. Have a good night. Or good day. All right, bye.